Week 3 of the IFL season has already come and passed. Feels like the season is flying by. In the first game of the week, we had the Sioux Falls Storm go to the Massachusetts Pirates. Massachusetts was favored by 7.5. They did cover that spread by 0.5, so it was a great spread. But Sioux Falls played better than they were expected to do, especially with how low they're ranked in the coaches poll. You go to the stats for this game, and you see quarterback Billy Hall threw for 3 touchdowns. He had a pretty solid day, 164 yards in the air, ran for another 3 touchdowns with 35 yards on the ground, with only 10 completions, but 3 touchdowns passing, so he did really good. They didn't have much of a run game against Massachusetts, but the running back did go and catch 2 touchdowns. Xavier Jackson did that. At wide receiver, Kentrus Bell had 70 yards and a touchdown receiving. So it was all around pretty solid day by the offense. Good enough to put up 41 points, which is pretty good against Massachusetts, one of the top teams in the league. Linebacker Amin Black had a sack, 2 tackles for loss, and 9 tackles with a fumble recovery. He had a really good game. And then the kicker was all right, but they had 2 guys get double-digit tackles in this game. For Massachusetts, Alejandro Benefield having another fantastic week, putting together an MVP caliber season. 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions on the year so far throughout 3 weeks. Only 1 incompletion this week. 5 passing touchdowns. He did great. He did lose a fumble, but he came out with the win and 5 passing touchdowns. They did have a pretty solid ground game with Jimmy Robinson rushing for 49 yards and having 2 touchdowns on the ground and then catching 1 in the air. They had 3 different receivers catch touchdowns, and their receiving core is just incredible. They have Thomas Owens, Tio Redding, and Isaac Zico. This was really the Thomas Owens game in the receiving room because got 2 really good touchdowns. We see a kicker kind of struggling, but that's not too bad, especially in the IFL. Whenever you're pinned deep in your own territory, you're forced to make 50, 60-yard field goals, so it's very understandable. But he did miss 2 PATs. So overall that game, I think the Storm are underrated. I think Billy Hall's a solid quarterback. I think he's going to lead them to a decent amount of victories this year. He can use his legs really well, and I don't think 15 is the right spot for them. But that is what they are in the coaches poll. Massachusetts at 2, I think that's solid. Massachusetts is easily one of the best teams in the league, and they have maybe the best quarterback this year. I did predict Massachusetts to win that game, and that did happen. On to the next game. We had Frisco in what seems to be somewhat of a theme, not covering a double-digit spread. Last week they didn't do it against Tulsa, and then this week they didn't do it against Duke City. 2 teams that are supposed to be not good going into the season. You see both ranked in the bottom 13. Frisco, obviously returning MVP quarterback TJ Edwards, struggled in this game, really, after a not good showing by the Gladiators in week 2 against San Diego. They did not cover this 13.5 point spread, as I said before. You go look at the fighter stats. It was a good game by Edwards. It was better than last week. Definitely better than last week. He went 8 for 10, only 57 yards, but 2 touchdowns passing and then 3 more on the ground, as he always does on the ground. Played good. Backup quarterback Larry Harrington had 46 yards on the ground, and Jimmy Smith had 23 yards on the ground and a score. They didn't have much going outside of TJ Edwards on overall with the offense, it kind of felt like they just didn't get that many yards. And then you look at the Gladiators. Javin Kilgo, who only had 2 touchdowns passing and 3 interceptions last week, goes in and throws for 5 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Obviously, he is struggling with turnovers this year. He did have a fumble lost as well, so 5 touchdowns, 3 turnovers, but he threw for 200 yards on you and 5 touchdowns. So it's starting to look like the Frisco defense is not going to be much of a beneficiary to this team this season, but it's week 2. Everything could turn around, really, for any team. They didn't have anything on the ground, but Kilgo really had a great game. Gregory Dent Jr. and Gunnery Sloan both had solid games. Sloan catching 3 touchdowns off of only 4 receptions. The Gladiators impressed me, but I think the real story is just Frisco again struggling with one of the lower ranked teams in the league, and they dropped from 3 to 4 in the power rankings, with the Nighthawks going up. In the next game, we got to see the first showing of the Tucson Sugar Skulls as they went on the road to defeat Northern Arizona. In this game, no, I think I have this wrong. Yeah, Northern Arizona won that game. Oh, no. Yeah. Sorry. But anyways, Northern Arizona did win this game. They got a good victory over the Sugar Skulls. The Sugar Skulls looked pretty good with quarterback Malik Mitchell. But anyways, for Northern Arizona, you had Joshua Jones, again, in his first year in the IFL. Didn't throw for any touchdowns week 1. Barely ran for 1. He comes out and throws for 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and then runs for another one. He was a star this game. Threw for over 200 yards against Tucson. They did not have a run game at all, but they didn't seem to need one. They had 3 receivers catch touchdowns, and 2 had 2 touchdowns. Well, Corker looks like maybe their best offensive player. He's had 2 really good weeks. Last week in the kick return game, and this week in the receiving game, he got 2 touchdowns, and then he ran for another one. So Northern Arizona looks like a solid team, like I said previously in last week's video. But for the Sugar Skulls, quarterback Malik Mitchell looked pretty solid, running for 4 touchdowns, passing for 1, over 200 yards of scrimmage. His legs really got them out of a ton of situations. Running back Mike Jones ran for 2 touchdowns. He had a really good game. And then Demario McCall caught the lone touchdown for the Sugar Skulls in the air. So overall, I think that Tucson is probably a below average team, but they're not an awful team. They could make a sneaky playoff run, but I don't see it happening. And then we have Northern Arizona, who looks to be average to above average. I think this is a good ranking for them, 7 in the coaches poll. They did cover the spread, and I did pick the Wranglers to win. I went 3-3 on this week in my predictions. Because of next game, we had the Arizona Rattlers go to the Bay Area Panthers, who have been ranked 1 all season in the coaches poll, and they covered a 1.5 point spread. Looked really good. Quarterback for Arizona, Dalton Sneed, did not play again this week. I'm pretty sure he's expected to be back after their bye in week 4, so in week 5, but I could be wrong, and they do play the Strike Force that week. So then you go look at the Rattlers stats for this game. Lorenzo Brown Jr. did get the start after he got Garrett Kettle got the start last week, and then Brown played the full second half for the Rattlers and nearly won them the game against the Nighthawks, but they did end up losing that game. So somehow the Rattlers have fallen to 1-2 on the season, but they've played pretty good teams. Brown didn't even have a bad game. He had 5 total touchdowns, 4 in the air, and went 14 for 20 passing. He had a pretty good game. On the ground, Carl Odom, 52 yards. That's pretty good. And then Glenn Gibbons Jr. had a fantastic game, catching 4 touchdowns off 4 receptions with 73 yards. Their kicker had a pretty solid game. 2 for 2 field goals, 5 for 5 PATs. The Panthers just came to play as the defending IFL champions. They looked great. They got quarterback DeQuan Neal, who was a starting IFL quarterback last year, not for the Panthers, but he comes there and continues winning there. He went 15 for 21 with 152 yards, 1 touchdown, and then 4 more on the ground with 80 yards rushing. He had a great game. The run game was solid with Shane Simpson. And then the receiving game was good. This team definitely deserves to still be ranked number 1. They are one of the best teams, if not the best team, in the IFL. I don't know if they'll repeat as champions, but they will definitely go to the playoffs. 1-0 on the season, and then next week they play at the Sharks, who have been a very disappointing team this season. Speaking of the Sharks, they are the next team, or in the next game we will talk about. The Sharks fall to 0-2 on the season after winning the NAL championship last year. Now, they did lose their quarterback, but we'll talk about him later on as he is now playing for the Gunslingers. The Sharks lost this game 33-39 to the Nighthawks. The Nighthawks look really good. I thought the Jacksonville would have a bounce-back game, but I was wrong. The Nighthawks they continue to play like they have been playing, and that's why they're ranked as one of the top teams in the IFL. You had quarterback Jerome Johnson throw for 2 touchdowns and run for another one. You had the ground game, which was good, with Terran Taylor running for a touchdown of 43 yards. All around, great showing at the beginning of the season by the Nighthawks. I love wide receiver Quentin Randolph for the Nighthawks. He's one of my favorite receivers in the IFL, and he did drop an early touchdown, but he had a good game. And then last week he had a really good game. For the Sharks, Connor Blunt continues to struggle with turnovers. Last week he had 1 touchdown throwing and 2 interceptions. This week he threw 2 more interceptions and 3 touchdowns. He now has a 4-4 TD-INT ratio on the year and has taken 3 sacks. I just don't think Jacksonville has what it takes, especially after their losses, to compete as one of the top teams in the IFL this season. Their run game with Logan Wright is pretty good, and they have played good teams. Wide receiver Cameron Sullivan, 3 receiving touchdowns. He had a good day. The Sharks are not a horrible team. They barely lost to one of the better teams in the IFL both weeks in a row. I think they're definitely more around here in this range, probably 8 than 12, just because they played the Pirates and then the Nighthawks, who are ranked the number 2 and 3 teams in the league. Now to the final game of the week. We had the San Antonio Gunslingers making their first appearance in the IFL, going to the San Diego Strike Force. This score is also wrong. So, the Gunslingers lost their opening game against San Diego. San Diego looked fantastic. Quarterback Nate Davis threw for 9 touchdowns after just throwing for 1 last week. This was the highest scoring game of the year so far. It was a great game. It came down to the final seconds. This is also wrong. But Nate Davis had a fantastic year. You had 3 guys catching over 1 touchdown. You had Jordan Kress and Isaiah Cox both catching 2, and then Arthur Jackson catching 4 with almost 100 yards receiving. You had Sherrod Williams returning a fumble for a touchdown. at the end of the game on kickoff because the Gunslingers were trying to do backwards laterals as a last chance to try and win the game on their kickoff return, and they happened to fumble it. San Antonio recovered it in the end zone for a score. So this game was actually closer than the score might indicate. But Nate Davis looks fantastic. And maybe the Gunslingers are not a great team, but still very impressive to throw 9 touchdowns. You look at the Gunslingers, like I said earlier, Sam Castronova, quarterback from Jacksonville last year, the Jacksonville Sharks, that is, he was their quarterback in when they won the NAL championship game. In this game, he had 8 total touchdowns. I don't think a touchdown was scored that he wasn't part of. He threw for 4 and ran for 4. He was their whole run game. 64 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's great. He passed really well. Maybe he only has 2 passing touchdowns, but regardless, he had a really good game. And then one of the biggest problems in this game was both teams' kickers. So many PATs were missed, and actually PATs may have decided the game. If San Antonio would have made their PATs, they would have actually been up whenever San Diego kicked off to them last, or forced San Diego to go for 2 one more time. And so maybe they win that game. But San Antonio did not have a horrible game. They didn't have a bad game at all. It was a great game, really good game, close game. But that is all the games throughout the week. And then you look at next week's games with some predictions. Northern Arizona goes to San Antonio. All these games are on Saturday, which I don't love, but it is what it is. Also, one more thing I do have to say about the San Antonio-San Diego game. The stream and the field looked amazing in San Diego. San Diego's new turf looks really good, and the stream was really high quality. And we haven't had that consistently throughout this year, but I just wanted to say props to them. And then in week 4, we do have the Gunslingers and the Wranglers. So I think this is going to be a really good game. I have Northern Arizona, but I could see San Antonio winning this game. Bay Area, top team in the league. I expect them to beat Jacksonville, but who knows? But I'm pretty confident in that pick. Tucson at Duke City. I think Duke City's the worst team in the league, so I did pick Tucson. But, I mean, they'll have 1 or 2 or 3 wins throughout the season sprinkled in there, so you never know where those are going to be. Then the Blizzard and the Steamwheelers. I think this is going to be maybe the game of the week. Blizzard are ranked 9, Steamwheelers are ranked 8. I think the Blizzard are better, but they are on the road. But also coming off a bye. But so are the Steamwheelers. I think this is going to be a good game, and I picked the Blizzard. And then finally, we have the Oilers and the Barnstormers, 2 of the lowest rated teams in the league. But Tulsa showed a lot of fight in them and how great their defense is again this year. 2 weeks ago, whenever they played Frisco at Frisco, forcing the game into overtime. So because of that and the game being in Tulsa, I did pick Tulsa. So that is my predictions. That is the game rundowns from last week for week 4 and week 3. So thank you all, and I will be back next week.